I'm Megan Baker, and this is InfluenceHER. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and awareness for this increasingly common and devastating issue is more important than ever. The impacts of domestic violence are far-reaching, and it can happen to anyone, regardless of gender, age, race, and financial status. This month on InfluenceHER, we hope to shine a light on the darkness that is domestic violence by sharing the powerful stories of women who have experienced it firsthand. With that, I'd like to introduce Denise Caulfield. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for asking me.
Denise is a survivor. She was brutally attacked and nearly killed by her husband 3 years ago. When you look back 3 years ago, did you think that you would be sitting here where you are today?
Certainly not. I feel very, I think that one of the questions is, I get asked a lot about, what happened that day, or did you see it coming? How did you make it out of that horrific circumstance? And I feel like in order to understand, you have to go backward just a smidge. And 2 months prior to the attack at my workplace, there had been an incident, like the first time physical arrest attack that my husband did to myself, and it was in the form of a vehicular assault that ended with an order of protection. So the day he was due to show up in the Schenectady County court system to say if he was going to accept their plea deal or not, was the day that he instead came to my workplace and repeatedly stabbed me. So the order of protection to me is an important piece of it because I oddly felt the most safe in my workplace because there were so many people around. Just the thought that there were so many people around, coworkers and clients that were coming in and out, that I wasn't secluded, I wasn't isolated, I wasn't out taking a walk or something by myself. So I felt so safe at my workplace. So I feel on that particular day, there was a lot of miracles that happened. So the first miracle was what I already stated, was that I was in a public place with a lot of people around me, a lot of witnesses to the attack, so there could not have been any question about who did this offense to me. The second miracle was that Liz Joy was my client that day. And Liz Joy was not my scheduled client that day. I actually had a woman who was retired and recovered from a knee surgery and had a cane. And she had an appliance that was being shipped that day and asked if I could do something. And I just called up Liz and said, hey, can I just trade appointment times? So instead I had a woman, who was just turned 50 years old, very physically fit, had no idea that she had a fight or flight mentality. She probably didn't even know she had it herself. So just having Liz in that position that day was the second miracle. The third miracle was that the gentleman who Liz left after 7 minutes of fighting my husband, she was getting winded and he just was not relenting. So she ran out of the building and she flagged a vehicle down, and this huge gentleman came running into the building. And it turned out, after I met him last fall, that he has never been on that road before. He was working construction out in Amsterdam, and he would always take the thruway back east to get home. And this one day, he just thought, I'm just going to drive up Route 5. So if he hadn't run into the salon and put my husband in a chokehold, I don't know that anyone would have come out alive on that one. So that was the third miracle that day. And then the fourth miracle was the gentleman who was just happened to be in the area, and it was random. He does go through my workplace area, but he's never there at that time, and something changed in his schedule, and he heard the call come in, and he thought, maybe I can be of some help. Sounds like a heart attack call. And came in, and it was nothing but. And if he wasn't there before the paramedics were there to literally do life-saving medical work on me to stop my blood loss, I forget about even getting to the hospital. I don't even think I would have survived and made it to the ambulance. So that was the fourth miracle, because he shouldn't have been there that day either. And so I think something else that kind of falls into that miracle category is just not having any idea how truly in trouble I was physically. Like in my mind's eye, I still looked exactly like I did when I got ready for work that day. You know, I don't have a drop of blood on me. Everything's clean and fine. Your peripheral and your memory is what you saw just previously. And I had no idea. I clearly still remember the cuts on my arms, and I knew that was bleeding out. I had no idea that I had substantial injuries to my abdomen, my small intestine, my large intestine, and more importantly, my artery. And I was bleeding out all over the salon floor. And that's just not an exaggeration. I don't even remember how much blood that they had put into me. But that gentleman showing up, you know, obviously worked on that. So I think not knowing, if I had heard like, wow, we don't think she's going to make it to the hospital, that really never entered my mindset at all. My mindset, my frame of mind was just, I was so angry at him for doing this and so angry for not thinking of our children and himself just getting into more deep legal trouble. And I'm like, we need this now too? I mean, that's where I was just coming from. And this inner drive and fight, like, no, I'm going home. And not only am I going home, I'm going home tonight, which was ridiculous given the circumstances, but that was my mindset at the time, that complete determination that I'm coming home and I'm going to my family. And hearing people in the ambulance talk about information, like how old is she, how much do you think she weighs? They were just trying to get information over to the hospital. And I just remember kind of lying there. I couldn't speak at all, and I just grabbed some man's hand that was near me. And I don't even know where this came from, but I took his palm and I just wrote my age in his palm. And he said, okay, you're 49? And I put a Y in his palm for a yes. And then something about my weight, which I knew they needed for the anesthesia. They have to do the proper ratio. And I put my weight in there, and he repeated it to me. I'm like, yes, you got that correct. So I just had, and just feeling like I had to stay awake. I couldn't give into this feeling of that. It just hurt so bad, and I just didn't want to be here. Like emotionally, I just didn't even want to be here. Physically, I didn't want to be here. Not to give up, but I just wanted to just get under anesthesia. But I remember grabbing the anesthesiologist's hand because it was a female and it was on my shoulder. And I just, with honestly, like the last stretch of energy, just allergy, anesthesia. And at that point, that was really ridiculous because they were looking like, okay, thanks for that information, but we thought we were gonna die in the ambulance. And you know, they had the OR ready for me to just go and take me right into the OR. So a lot of separate miracles in there. And if I needed just one more piece, is that we really don't know how this didn't, with all those other factors that I put in there, this would have been a murder case, not an attempted murder case. And I have yet to have met any doctor that was either at Albany Medical Center, who are exceptional, by the way, and any doctor that I have in my, my primary care, my specialists that I have, they all were privy to my medical records, and they've said to me, Denise, we have no idea how you survived this. And not only how I survived it, but that I do not have any lasting medical issues because of that. There's that in and of itself, all of it put together is a really big miracle and that I have no explanation for, but I'm incredibly grateful for.
Denise, you are in the midst of an active divorce, and it's important to note because in our area, there hasn't, been a case like yours. So let's talk a little bit about that, and what is the result of that now?
So what I found out in the history, well, first of all, in New York State, we are divided up into multiple judiciary districts, and my divorce attorney started to do some case study law to see if there was a existing case which she could reference to see if the traditional 50-50 split of assets worked in this. And it was during that attempt of her trying to gather up information that she learned that in the history of New York State, our judicial district had not a single case of one spouse trying to kill another spouse during an active divorce case. So she had to work out mathematically by districts and found some case study down in the New York City area of couples where their situation and length of time that they had been, and also an egregious attempt of a murder, was applicable to our case. So she offered me the opportunity, and what were my thoughts, to go forth to the judge here in Schenectady County to challenge the 50-50. And the judge, in the end, looking at other family case study law from downstate, awarded us a much higher percentage. So now, if anyone in our district or close to our district is in the same unfortunate situation, they can reference Caulfield versus Caulfield and have some benefit to that.
So you set the precedent?
Yes, we did. We made legal history that day.
What are the most common misconceptions about domestic violence?
Well, that's a good question. So I feel like the most common misconceptions fall into not only who the abuser is, but who the victim is. And, I'm a kid of the 70s, so, I grew up on Hollywood TV and Hollywood TV shows and movies, and you had a very specific character or stereotype as to not only who the abuser was, but who the victim was. So, and I think we now realize right now that there isn't a specific type of person, whether it be their class, their sex, their socioeconomic level that they have, amount of education, or it's just drugs and alcohol that are involved. And really important to mention here is that we don't even separate typically the difference between physical abuse and mental abuse, emotional abuse, and that there might be mental disease going on that's fueling this, not necessarily drugs and alcohol that are fueling this. So there's so much that's in there, and I also feel like even the word victim, that you're a domestic violence victim, there just seems like there must be some word that we can assign to someone that doesn't just give you the implications that this person is either lacking self-confidence or isn't financially stable or isn't a weak individual. The victim, because I don't have a better word for it, any type of personality that they can be as well, it's just those categories are just so, those typical stereotypes still, it seems so obvious that we need to break it down today and change that, but yet it's not rolling over too much for people to know.
What changes would you like to see happen within the legal system before a crime ever happens, a domestic violence crime?
I don't know. I'm going to say I don't know how to fix it, but I can tell you that in attempting to prevent, and not that I knew that a crime would happen, but trying to find answers and understand the law for myself and for him, and what are both individual rights, which sometimes is a little competing with one another. It did seem that the biggest thing that's missing in our legal system is a resource for prevention, like prevention in capital letters. There's the nothing has happened to good golly, a massive crime has happened, but there's nothing legally in between. And the only thing that so basically you're waiting for a crime to happen. I actually said that to an officer that I brought to my home one day, just trying to understand what could be done. And the man said to me, is it a little weird? Is it odd? Well, sure, but the law hasn't been broken here, so there's not a lot I can do. I said, so basically we have to just sit and wait for the law to be broken or for something really huge to happen either to himself or to the family, and then you do something? And he was like, he didn't even want to say it out loud. He just kind of gave me one of those nods like, yeah.
What is it like for a female domestic violence survivor navigating the whole process and in a male-dominated fields, such as medical, law enforcement, courts, etc.? What was that whole process like?
That was a very frustrating learning lesson. Because I do feel like if you're a law-abiding person and you didn't grow up in this environment whatsoever, and you're suddenly thrust into this when you're in crisis, you need help, you need assistance, and I don't know how to navigate this field. I don't know. It wasn't part of my upbringing whatsoever. So medically, I felt like everything was fine. I didn't find much of a difference between people in the medical field, whether they were therapists, whether they were psychiatrists or medical doctors. I didn't really find that there was much of a difference between men helping me or females helping me. The assistance was pretty equal in that regard. The best example I can give you was, again, going back to the fact that we had a previous altercation that ended in his arrest. That fell through Schenectady County. And on the evening of that assault, the officer came to my house and told me what the charges were and that I was having an order of protection against my husband. And I was just kind of confused. I was clearly traumatized, but I was also kind of confused. Like, what do you mean there's an order of protection? So the officer said to me, well, when we have, when the law has been broken, we're required as the officers to bring it to the district attorney. And the district attorney was a female that was taking the calls, I guess, that evening. So she said very insightful 2 questions to the officer. The first one was, is there an arrest history or any previous incidents? And the officer said no. And her next question was, how long have they been married? And he said 28 years. So she said, we have to give, I know what the charges are, we need to give this woman and her family an order of protection. Because this family, you don't go from 0 to 100 in 28 years. This has been an underlying case. This family has been in crisis for some time, but they've been flying under the radar. So they need an order of protection. And that was, whether that was female advice, just that intuition that we tend to have.
Wow.
But the piece why that is so important was when I went a few days later after the assault, and now I'm talking to the assistant DA, who was a male, he was just so infuriated that the district attorney in his mind had overreacted and given me an order of protection. He was seeing it as, well, this is a first offense, this is ridiculous, why did she overreact in this way? And then and I'm asking, well, can we, how do we extend this? And he was saying to me, well, Denise, he does co-own that house. Sooner or later, you're gonna have to let him into your house. He felt like everything was being overreactive and hyped up and clearly had lost any empathy if he had ever had it. And I was furious with him. And I actually said to him, look I realize you do this every day, and I don't know how many years you've been doing this, but I have never even been in a courtroom before. And I was just assaulted 3 days ago. So yes, I'm emotional. Yes, I'm asking a lot of questions. I don't know how I'm supposed to be acting differently, but I don't care for how you're treating me right now. And then he softened a little bit. So that was Schenectady County with that gentleman. And then on the flip side of that, after the attack, the attempted murder happened, and now I'm in Albany County, the district attorney I met was Shannon Sarfo, who is exceptional. And she came to my hospital room at Albany Medical Center, spent 2 hours with us. I believe it was a holiday in the middle of the afternoon. And she came, talked to myself, my mother, my kids, young adults, my sister who had flown in from across country. She was empathetic. She was knowledgeable, she was supportive, she asked questions that made advice. I felt immediately like I had a partner with this woman. And it was in complete contrast to the gentleman I had in Schenectady. So one woman, where I felt Shannon was completely empathetic and knowledgeable and had not been hardened by her profession, I cannot say the same about that gentleman, but I have wanted to go back often and say, hey, do you remember me?
What advice do you have for anyone watching who might be experiencing abuse at home, either with a current partner or a former partner?
I think first and foremost would be know what your legal rights are, and even though you may have doors slammed in your face, you're not getting anywhere, keep pushing forward. Talk with someone, and do not feel that what is going on in your home or in your life is either acceptable, is not reversible, and that you carry shame for that. We often do not, nobody in my life, except for a scant few, had any idea what was going on or what I was dealing with. There is an oppressive level of shame that we have, or no, everyone's gonna think I'm crazy for trying to fix this, or why are you hanging in there? Like, what are you doing? And so there's definitely something like, I don't want to be judged by people, and I don't want to be asked, what are you doing? Because at that point, obviously, the only option is you have to get out. So I think for the person hearing this that needs to hear this, near some advice, you don't want to go home. You have fear. You don't even recognize your relationship. If you've had a long relationship, as I did with my husband for over 30 years, it wasn't always awful. There was a period of time back in the day when mental illness hadn't come into his life where it was manageable, and obviously I would not have married him. I would not have had 2 children. But the down spiral happened. And I think the biggest mistake I made that someone out there would quite recognize is that I put too much of my energies in trying to either fix his problems or to direct him to the people who could assist him with the problems, because the problems that he was always trying to identify as to why he couldn't change things, they were this little capsule over here. If we have more money, I would be better. I get the right job, it would be better, and all of that. It had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with underneath. And once the root cause of what was going on. And once I started holding him accountable to see, okay, well, I understand that you have this problem, but you still need to do whatever it is. It's a home, we have children, all of those things. You got to get a job, you have to do maintenance, you have to be a parent, you have to be a husband. I got pushback on that from him. He didn't want to be held accountable. So to try to wrap it up for anyone who's hearing it is just, you work on you. And once you're working on you and you can get yourself in a better place, if you have anything left to give, maybe you can help that person that needs it. But in the meantime, you need to get out and work on you.
Denise Caulfield, thank you so much for sharing your remarkable story of survival. Thank you. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, there are resources to get help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-SAFE. The hotline is free, confidential, and available 24/7.